Nice to be in Ourimbah Church on Sabbath morning again. I'm looking around to see if I can see a poem in the house. I don't think so. Is one of the Bowen brothers still coming here? Sometimes. Good. I can't remember his name. What's wrong with me? Don. Yes, Don. I knew, of course, I knew Ken fairly well. I knew Ken in Papua New Guinea when I was working up there many years ago. So, yeah. There was mention of Dora Creek's 75th anniversary. When my parents first moved to Avondale a very long time ago, it must indeed have been 75 years ago, my father was going to go to Avondale to study theology. He did 1 year, but things happened. He got sick, he got polio, and he never finished that, and he spent his career working with the Sanitarium Health Food Company. But I think my parents were foundation members of the Dora Creek Church. I remember attending Dora Creek. My earliest memories are of Dora Creek Church. So that would have been probably from about the... When do kids get their first memories? Maybe age of 2 or 3? 3 or 4? Probably varies a bit. But my first memories of church are Dora Creek. What else did I want to mention? My wife is going into hospital this week. I'll mention that. It's nothing very bad. I mean, I married Elaine 31-something years ago, and very early in our marriage, very early, she was diagnosed with chronic myeloid leukemia, CML. And if you know anything about leukemia, you know that back then it was fatal. She was told, "You're dying, girl, resign from your job, go home, prepare to die." It was said politely, but that was the message. So she was working at the conference at the time. She was the conference accountant, I think, and she resigned from her work, went home, started taking a trial drug, dasatinib, which she took for 17 years, and it kept her going. And then they came along with a better drug, Scemblix, which she's taking now, and she's still going. And she's in pretty good health, but she's going into hospital on Tuesday to get a massive hernia removed. I mean, it's wrapped all around her internal organs. So she's looking forward to that. We're both looking forward to that going. Do I detect a bit of a South African influence in the name? Right. I've never been to South Africa. My brother has, because my brother, when he was younger, did a bit of tripping around, and my father worked in South Africa for about 10 years or so with National True Foods. Have you heard of National True Foods? It was a church health food work operated by the Seventh-day Adventist Church in South Africa for, I think, about 10 years or so. But when Dad left, I think that was the end of it. I don't think it really took off. Is it perhaps because the South African church members are not strong on vegetarianism? I think that might have had something to do with it. But yeah, it didn't get going, so Dad came home and retired. Yes, I better get down to the business then. Privileged to be back at Ourimbah Church. I will follow my notes closely as I always do. If I don't do that, I tend to wander, and we might be here half the afternoon. So my notes keep me disciplined. I like to take a walk on Sunday mornings. I typically do that. I'll take a walk up to Avondale Village and buy a Sunday newspaper. Not so much for the news, but for the giant crossword. And I'll spend the rest of the week, if it takes that long, finishing the crossword. On my walk up there on Easter Sunday of 2024, what are we up to? 2026. So a bit over 2 years ago, I saw a lady sitting on the seat outside the pharmacy. Didn't recognise her at all, and I just said a cheery good morning to her. And I don't know why, but for some reason I ended up sitting down and talking to her for half an hour. We chatted there for quite a while. She looked to be about the age of my daughters. I've got 3 daughters. They are all now in their 50s. And I'll call this lady, what did I call her? Deborah. I'll call her Deborah. She looked to be about the age of my daughters. She'd come up from the Central Coast. She still lives somewhere here on the Central Coast. And she'd gone up there for an Easter outing. She'd never been to Ourimbah before. You know, the centre of the universe, and she'd never been there before. She had no particular agenda. She wasn't visiting people. She didn't know a soul in Ourimbah. It wasn't a business trip. She was just looking around. So I began to feel rather good about myself because I had flown the flag for Ourimbah and welcomed a visitor. As we chatted, she became reflective. She began to share with me some very personal things, including personal disappointments, personal insecurities, her failed marriage, her disillusionment with the priests. So I guessed she was a Catholic. And for the first time in her life, she was feeling spiritually adrift. And there we were, 2 complete strangers sharing a spiritual conversation. I encouraged her to read the Gospels. She told me she had a Bible in her car, which was almost beside where we were sitting. And she read it from time to time. I told her that my life was grounded in the Scriptures and in a personal relationship with Jesus. And she found that interesting. She admitted that in her life she did not feel grounded. But she liked Isaiah 53, the passage cited by Jesus in Luke 22. It's an amazing messianic prophecy. I never cease to be amazed with Isaiah 53. You read Isaiah 53 and who do you see there? Jesus, so plainly, so clearly. And if we reflect upon that, there are many, some 300 plus prophecies in the Old Testament about Jesus. But anyway, I suggested to Deborah, is that what I called her? I'm afraid I might spit out the wrong name. I suggested that she might find what she was looking for in the Gospels. And indeed, I went so far as to suggest she might find something helpful in the big red church across from where we were sitting. You could see Memorial Church from outside the pharmacy there. Or at the end of the drive, of course, there's University Church up there, the church that where my membership is. I learned that she was from Ourimbah. Perhaps Ourimbah is not too far from here. And I mentioned that we had a church at Ourimbah Adventist Church. And she told me she knew about that church. It was right near where she lived. I told her that I knew the minister at Ourimbah Church because he was not only a graduate of Avondale University, he was one of my former students. He spent a semester in my class. Oh, I called her Deborah, did I? Deborah thought that she might visit one of those churches the following Sabbath. Well, I didn't see her at Uni Church the following Sabbath, nor did I see her at Erina on a visit several Sabbaths later. And I've often wondered what became of Deborah. Did she get to know Jesus as a personal friend? Did she become a learner at his feet? You know, at the feet is a byword for the learning experience. We speak of learners sitting at the feet of their teachers. Now, I was a teacher for some 44 odd years, so I'm familiar with all of this. But of course, falling at someone's feet can have other meanings too. John mentions an occasion when Mary fell at Jesus' feet crying, "Lord, if only you'd been here. If only you'd been here, my brother would not have died." John 11:32. Proximity. Proximity. It reminds me of the woman who thought that she'd be healed if she could just get close enough to Jesus to touch the hem of his robe, Matthew 9:21. 3 of the 4 Gospels record this incident. Luke is the only one who doesn't. When Jesus saw her weeping and saw the other people wailing with her, a deep anger welled up inside of him, John 11:33. And 5 verses later, in verse 38, Jesus was still angry as he arrived at the tomb. Now, we don't often see Jesus angry. And it's not a passing emotion either, because his anger is enduring. What explains his ongoing anger in this chapter? Was it an emotional response to Mary's distress? After all, she was a personal friend. Both she and her 2 siblings were personal friends. Or had Jesus' anger been aroused by the other mourners? This question didn't even occur to me until I wrote this sermon. It was only then that I realised Jesus' anger had nothing to do with Mary's tears. It was the fake tears of the other mourners that angered him. So what was it about these other mourners that drew this angry response? After mentioning all the miraculous signs Jesus had done, John adds that most of the people still did not believe in him. That was the problem, perhaps. It fulfilled the prophecy of Isaiah. Isaiah 6 verse 10 says, "Harden the hearts of these people, plug their ears and shut their eyes. That way they won't see with their eyes, nor hear with their ears, nor understand with their hearts, and come to me for healing." Isaiah gave fair warning about the fate of people who would reject his message. Many of the other mourners alluded to in John 11:33 were just like the hypocrites mentioned by Isaiah. Because a few days later, some of these same people would be yelling, "Crucify him, crucify him." John reports in John 12 verse 3 that Mary took the jar of perfume and anointed Jesus' feet, wiping them with her hair. And the fragrance filled the house. Now Matthew, the former tax collector, knew about the value of money. Matthew reports that the disciples were indignant at Mary's wastefulness. Mark agreed that some of those at the table had made harsh, judgmental comments. But John is more precise. He identifies Judas as the one who had made those harsh comments and complained about Mary's wastefulness. And Jesus replied, Matthew 26:10, "Why criticize this woman for doing such a good thing to me? You'll always have the poor among you, but you won't always have me. She has poured this perfume on me to prepare my body for burial. I tell you the truth, wherever the good news is preached throughout the world, this woman's deed will be remembered and discussed." And that was a very true prophecy, because here we are 2,000 years later and we are remembering it and discussing it. Well, many Bible stories mention people falling at someone's feet. The reasons, of course, vary. In 1 Samuel 25, verse 24, we read how a beautiful young woman named Abigail fell at the feet of King David after he had been rebuffed by her husband Nabal. You know the meaning of Nabal, don't you? It means blockhead. I don't know whether his mother gave him that name at birth or whether it's a name that was applied to him later when his character began to come out. Well, he and his men, David and his men, had passed through Nabal's territory, and on their transit, they'd done him no harm. David at the time was a warrior, and these were his soldiers, these were his fighting men. David had done no harm and made no attempt at all to extort money from Nabal. Yet it's clear that Nabal had a very bad attitude towards David, because in verse 10 he said, "Who does this son of Jesse think he is?" He was sneering at the great David. Well, I've already mentioned to you that Nabal means something like blockhead. I did wonder whether he was given the name at birth, but I suspect it must have been applied later, after his true character began to emerge. After Nabal's surly response, David determined to take vengeance on this arrogant man. 1 Samuel 25, verse 13, he cried out, "Get your swords," and with 400 armed men and filled with deadly intentions, David prepared to visit Nabal. And in verse 22, he said, "May God strike me and even kill me if one man of his household is still alive tomorrow morning." This was pretty serious stuff. In great alarm, Nabal's servants reported this to Abigail. Perhaps I could expand the context a little and mention that David's men had been very good to Nabal and his men. Indeed, being in their vicinity, they'd been a real blessing. Nabal's men suffered no harm and no loss with David's men around. Verse 17 says, "They had been like a wall of protection." But Nabal was so ill-tempered that no one could so much as talk to him. Not a nice man. Not a nice man at all. Well, Abigail's intervention saved the day for Nabal and his entire household. If Abigail had not intervened, they were all dead men and people. But the ill-tempered Nabal was on thin ice. It's interesting to notice that inside of 2 weeks, he had a stroke and died following a drunken revel. It's probably a message in there too about what we benefit from drinking. I don't understand drunken rebels. I've never ever in my life even once so much as tasted the stuff. I have no idea what alcohol tastes like. Well, David had an eye for beautiful women. And so, as we are aware, he married Nabal's alluring widow. And for good measure, he also married at the same time Ahinoam of Jezreel. It occurred to me as I read this, David was a bit like Muhammad. If Muhammad saw a beautiful woman, he took her. Didn't matter what her marriage status was. He took the wife of one of his, was it a friend or a relative on one occasion? He had no regard for that. If she was already married, Muhammad would find a way around it or through it. But you know, the same applied to David. Remember how he got hold of Bathsheba? Yeah, it was the prerogative of kings. Well, so much for David. Here's another case of a woman falling at someone's feet. This was the woman of Shunem, who fell at the feet of Elisha following the death of her son, 2 Kings 4:27. And responding to her grief, Elisha raised the boy from the dead, a remarkable miracle. There are not many miracles in the Bible of people being raised from the dead. There are a few. This is one of them. And then when the boy was raised, she fell at his feet again, filled with gratitude for having her son restored. In Mark 7:25, a Syrophoenician woman, a Gentile from Tyre, fell at Jesus' feet. Instead of accepting her humility, Jesus gave her a hard time. Matthew remembered it as a 3-stage test. First, Matthew 25:23. First, Jesus ignored her. He simply gave her no response, no reply. Then second, in verse 24, he said his mission was only for the people of Israel, not the people of Tyre and Sidon. And then in verse 26, he said the children's food could not be given to the dogs. By children, he didn't mean infants, he meant the children of Abraham. However, this woman didn't back down. She wasn't intimidated. Instead, she continued to argue with Jesus. Verse 27, "True, Lord," she said, "true, Lord, but even the dogs eat the scraps that fall from the master's table." What a brilliant little piece of logic. And such boldness as to go ahead and make the point. Well, she passed Jesus' test because he commended her for her great faith. Do you remember how many people in the New Testament Jesus commended for their great faith? Just 2. This lady, and who was the other one? In Matthew 8, verse 10, a Roman officer. And what do you notice about those 2 people? Neither one of them was a Jew. Neither one of them was of the children of God. They were both Gentiles. Well, in Luke 17, we find a report of Jesus healing 10 lepers. 9 of them were Israelites, and 1 was a foreigner. 1 was an alien. Jesus sent them off to report to the priests, and on the way, they were healed. And when they were healed, what happened? One of them turned around and came back and fell to the ground at Jesus' feet to thank him. And the one was the foreigner, the Samaritan. Yeah. Well, out of interest, we could note a couple of cases where falling at the feet misfired. The first one is in Acts 10:25, which records that a Roman officer by the name of Cornelius, on one occasion, fell at Peter's feet to worship him. Peter, of course, was horrified. Alarmed, Peter pulled him up, saying, "Stand up, man, I'm just a human like you." The second one is in Revelation 19, verse 10. This is the scene where John fell at an angel's feet to worship him. Do we worship angels? No, indeed, we don't. The angel quickly corrected him, saying, "No, don't worship me. I'm a servant of God, just like you and your brothers and sisters. Worship only God." It's worth noting before leaving that John was one of 11 Bible characters visited by an angel. But he was the only one who reacted to that angel by attempting to worship. I won't take the time to mention the other 10, 5 in the Old Testament and 5 in the New Testament. Well, John slipped up when he fell at the feet of an angel, but he got it right in Revelation 1:17, where he fell at the feet of the one who identified himself as the first and the last, the living one. "I died, but look, I'm alive forever and ever," he said, "and I hold the keys of death and the grave." All of these cases depict men casting themselves at someone's feet. Notice men casting themselves at someone's feet. The New Testament, however, depicts Jesus, the God-man, kneeling at people's feet. In John 13, he celebrates the Passover with his disciples. You remember the event? They're upstairs in the room. The basin and the water are in the corner. The disciples are all at the table. Jesus is at the table. And who was eager to get up and do the role of the servant and pick up the basin? And none of them. None of the disciples. It was their job. And when nobody moved, Jesus got up from the table, took off his robe, wrapped a towel around his waist, and poured water into the basin. Then he began to wash the disciples' feet, drying them with the towel he had around him. Now, as I said, this was the work of a servant. And that's the reason why the disciples refused to do it. Would we have been happy to do service on that occasion ourselves? I imagine we'd have done exactly what the disciples did. They were above performing such menial service. Jesus wasn't. He gladly put himself at the feet of his disciples, and having washed their feet, he gave them a command. John 13, verse 14, "Since I, your Lord and Master, have washed your feet, you ought also to wash one another's feet. I have given you an example to follow. Do as I have done to you." And so we do to this day. In our church and in some other churches, we wash one another's feet. I've participated in foot washing. One of the last times I did it, I think, was with my former neighbour. His name has gone from my mind. I have such a terrible memory. If I don't have it written down, it's gone. But yeah, he was my next door neighbour at Pacific Adventist University. So yes, I've fallen at people's feet in the foot washing ceremony, but outside of the church setting, I've never fallen at anybody's feet, not even my wife's. When I proposed to my wife Elaine, we were walking along the banks of the Dora Creek River. I didn't kneel down. I just stood and walked with her. That was more than 30 years ago, yeah. And we were married 6 months later. Graduation Sunday in a lovely little stone chapel up at Pecolbin. And we had found each other on a fly and build. I'm a great believer in fly and builds. Actually, we didn't believe it. We didn't build anything. We painted. It was a fly and paint, really. We went on a fly and paint to Fiji. And 6 months later, we were married. And we've had a wonderfully happy life together. I've been married twice. I know the difference between one that works and one that doesn't. Sadly, my late ex-wife died 8 years ago? Yeah, about 8 years ago. In Philippians 2:10, Paul discusses the importance to believers of having the mind of Christ. Though Christ was God, he did not cling to the honour he was due, the respect he deserved, the rights that were his as King of the universe. He came down to our level. No, indeed, he descended even lower than that. Paul says he took the position of a slave and died a criminal's death on a cross, Philippians 2:7 and 8. And from the cross, his dead body was conveyed to a tomb, the new tomb of Joseph of Arimathea. But fortunately, blessedly, wonderfully, he had a very short stay in that tomb. He rested through the hours of the Sabbath. And early on the morning of the third day, he emerged victorious from that tomb. At the entrance to the tomb, the Roman soldiers, the guards there, fell into a dead faint at the sight of the angel who rolled away the stone. Now, falling into a dead faint isn't quite the same as falling at the feet. A dead faint suggests terror, not loving relationship, not willing service. Falling at the feet, of course, suggests submission, perhaps the start of a relationship. Luke 24 verse 1 depicts the women arriving at the tomb early on Sunday with spices to anoint a dead body. But the tomb held no dead body. Inside, they were greeted by angels telling them that Jesus had risen. Puzzled and weeping, the women fled from the tomb to share this startling news with the other believers. And as she turned to leave the tomb, Mary saw the gardener and asked him a question. "Sir, have you taken him away? Tell me where you've put him, and I will be glad to go and get him." At the next word, everything changed. John 20 verse 16, "Mary," Jesus said, just one word. And there was instant recognition. Mary knew that voice. "Teacher," she cried, and she reached out to try and grab hold of him. But in verse 17 of John 20, Jesus said, "Don't cling to me, for I have not yet ascended to the Father." By the way, this is evidence against the claim that Jesus returned to paradise with the repentant thief on the Friday evening. Most Bible translations get the punctuation of Luke 23:43 a little bit wrong. Trust me, I know about punctuation. I taught it for many, many, many years because I was an English teacher. Jesus replied, "I assure you, today you'll be with me in paradise." Was Jesus with that man that day in paradise? Not according to what we've just been reading. according to what we just read, Jesus didn't go to paradise before the Sunday, several days later. It was the assurance that occurred on the Friday, not the reunion in paradise. I assure you today we'll be together, but not today. All of the faithful will be there to participate in that great reunion. What a joyous moment it must have been for Mary Magdalene and the other women to come face to face with their risen Lord that Sunday morning. They must have watched in disbelief when they saw him crucified. I don't believe Judas believed that Jesus would allow himself to be put on that cross. I think Judas was trying to press the hurry up button, and when he saw what happened, he was so devastated that, well, we know what happened. Not everyone falls gladly at Jesus' feet in this life, but eventually they will. In Philippians 2 verse 10, Paul reminds us of the Lord's declaration in Isaiah 45:23, which says, and I quote, "Every knee will bend to me and every tongue will confess allegiance to me." From some, it will arise from faith. From others, it will be an acknowledgement forced from them without any faith whatsoever. Relationship, of course, does not involve force. "Where are you?" God once asked Adam. He knew where they were. He knew why they were hiding. They'd wandered away. Humanity has been wandering ever since. But Jesus invites us back. You know Matthew 11:28 to 30 quite well, I'm sure. "Come unto me, all you who are weary from carrying heavy burdens. I'll give you rest. Take my yoke upon you. It's easy to bear. And the burden I give you is light." Do we believe this? Do we really, really believe it? Do we know it from experience? Do we know the light burden that Jesus gives us? Well, it's an invitation that inspires hope, and it comes from an all-loving God. How could anyone possibly ignore it? How could they reject it? And yet they do. The writer of Hebrews describes it, Hebrews 5:11, "You are so spiritually dull and don't seem to listen. You are like babies who need milk and can't eat solid food." A clear case of spiritual attention deficit. If it's like this inside the church, the condition of the world doesn't bear thinking about. It's on the path to destruction, racing towards the abyss. I wonder if Deborah senses this in her spiritual wandering. I hope she gets to know the Lord before it's too late. In Revelation 3:20, we don't see Jesus kneeling at our feet. Instead, he's standing at the door knocking. He longs to be invited in, but he does not force an entry. We have to choose. We have to open the door. He doesn't kick it in. And if we do open the door, it says there, he wants to come in and do what? He wants to come in and party with us. That's what he wants to do. Let me end with a brief reading from the Psalms, Psalm 103. Psalm 103 verse 13, "The Lord is like a father to his children, tender and compassionate to those who fear him, for he knows how weak we are. He remembers we are only dust. Our days on the earth are like grass. Like wildflowers we bloom and then die. The wind blows and we're gone, as though we had never been. But the love of the Lord remains forever with those who fear him. As believers, we kneel in the presence of our Lord, sinners but not enemies. Paul describes the fate of his enemies. They'll be humbled beneath his feet, it says in 1 Corinthians 15:22. If you don't want to be humbled beneath his feet then, we need to be humbled now. John describes the reward of the victors in Revelation 3:21. Those who are victorious, this is unbelievable, those who are victorious will sit with me on my throne. Imagine that. Just as I was victorious and sat with my Father on his throne. What a promotion. What a promotion from at the feet to on the throne. What a glorious prospect. And it's ours in Jesus and because of Jesus and only through Jesus. Amen.